Hello and welcome back. I decided to create this episode because I want to talk about empathy. And in thinking about where to voice my thoughts and my feelings, I decided that this was the medium that I was going to use. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge that I created this YouTube series initially as a way to entertain and bring some levity to my community during the quarantine, the lonely quarantine days of the coronavirus. However, what I want to talk about today is quite serious, and I hope it's understood that I in no way mean to make light of any of these topics, or to trivialize them in any way. I, of course, am referring to the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent turmoil that we have seen in the United States over this last week. So to begin talking about empathy, first want to say that empathy is really easy to have when we have a shared experience. For example, heartbreak, and I'm talking about romantic heartbreak. Most of us have experienced a romantic heartbreak of some kind at some point in our lives. And so when we talk to somebody about that kind of shared experience, it's really easy for us to be like, oh, yeah, I've been there, I know how you feel. When we don't have a shared experience, it's much more difficult for us to have that empathy. It doesn't mean that we can't. It doesn't mean that we can't have that understanding of how another person is feeling. It means that it's going to require more of us. It's going to require time, and it's going to require effort. So this is where it becomes more difficult to talk about some of this stuff. So I'm just going to dive in. I didn't grow up being afraid of the police. I am not today afraid of the police. Fear of the police has not been part of my personal experience. When I get pulled over, my biggest fear is, am I going to get a ticket? How fast was I going? But I hope I have the wherewithal to recognize that just because something has not been part of my personal experience does not mean that it has not been part of somebody else's personal experience. But this is an area where it's more difficult for me to understand how other people feel because it has not been part of my personal experience. But empathy is really important to me. Understanding how other people feel is something that is important to me. And I guess on my better days, I recognize that I need to put some effort into certain areas of where I have empathy. And that is another place where movies are really important to me. Those of you that know me know that movies are a significant part of my life. Movies are a big part of how I process the world and process and understand my own emotions and my own beliefs. I think also, movies are art, and I think that all art, one of the most important functions that any type of art can serve is to facilitate understanding and connection between people, to facilitate understanding of a new idea, what might be a new emotion to us, and to connect us. So again, I want to say that as I talk about this stuff, I really don't mean to trivialize it in any way. I hope my sincerity is evident. But one of the ways when that I attempt to, I think that movies can be a pathway to a deepening of empathy. I don't think that just because I watch a movie that depicts racial injustice that I now understand it completely. That's not what I think. But I do think that watching some movies, again, is a pathway to a deepening of empathy, and to, can be part of coming to a deeper understanding. I think that something that I really adore about movies is the shared experience. And I think that when we don't have the shared experience in real life, but we can have this shared experience through a movie, that again, that can become something that facilitates some understanding and some connection that leads to dialogue, the dialogue that is really, really important right now. So with that in mind, I have two movies that I want to share with you today that have been part of my own attempt to have more empathy. The first movie is Fruitvale Station. Fruitvale Station came out in 2013. It is the directorial debut of Ryan Coogler, who also directed Creed and Black Panther, and it stars Michael B. Jordan. Fruitvale Station tells the story, the true life story, of the murder of Oscar Grant. Oscar Grant was murdered by police officers, and it happened on the early morning hours of New Year's Day, 2009. He was in an altercation of some kind on a train from San Francisco to Oakland. And upon arriving in Oakland, Oscar Grant and several other people were detained by police officers. And Oscar Grant was unarmed, and he was lying face down on the ground when he was shot in the back by one of these officers. And that's murder. I don't think you can call it anything but murder. And it was one of the certainly not the first unarmed black man to die in this sort of way at the hands of police. But this was the beginning of the era in which we had cameras built into cell phones. And so it was, I think, the beginning of more national recognition and awareness of these crimes, because it found its way into social media, and the footage was on the news and things. And so anyway, what is really, I think, important about this film, and what is beautifully done in this film, is that it really humanizes Oscar Grant. The movie takes place over the course of the last day of his life. The majority of the movie showing what he was going through as a person and again, it humanizes him. I don't mean to sound callous, but I know that oftentimes, whatever the tragedy might be, when I see these things in the news, they are sad to me, but they are headlines. They are things that I don't deeply feel because I don't have a personal connection to them. And, I think all of us are desensitized in a lot of ways these days. But again, that's why I think it's important to find ways to more deeply feel these things that should be felt. And what this movie does is it very much makes Oscar Grant he was a real person, but through watching the movie, we feel a connection. And we feel the loss when he dies at the end. And again, I don't feel that I knew Oscar Grant personally, but having watched the film, the first time I saw this film, I was very affected by it, and it really stayed with me. It stayed in my consciousness for several days after watching it. I think that is, in some small way, feeling the loss of a human life. A human life was lost, and this movie allows anybody to feel that loss in some way. And I think that it is important that we feel that loss. A lot of credit goes to how well the movie is made, and to Michael B. Jordan delivering a superb performance. He was not nominated for an Oscar, but he absolutely deserved an Oscar nomination for this performance. Again, it's about feeling empathy and truly feeling the importance of a human life that was lost. That's what I took from this movie. It has other things to say, and I think that's what I took the most from it. It also absolutely kind of facilitates thinking about how much these kinds of things are motivated by fear and a lack of understanding of our fellow man. The other movie that I want to share with you, I just watched for the first time last night. That movie is Detroit. Detroit came out in 2017. It was directed by Catherine Bigelow, who won the Academy Award for directing The Hurt Locker. Detroit tells the story of an incident that occurred during the Detroit City riots of 1967. I think what's most troubling about watching this movie is that it's telling a true story that occurred 53 years ago. And in watching it, it feels like a story that could have happened last week. And it's pretty eye-opening in seeing how little progress we've made in a lot of ways in the span of 53 years. I don't want to give away too much, because I think that an important part of this film is how you experience it. So basically what you have is the story of, there's a number of characters, but essentially you have 3 patrol officers in Detroit, white patrol officers, who essentially take captive a group of young black men and 2 white women and torture them. And it is all motivated by racism, racial tension. And it's a very intense and deeply upsetting film. More upsetting than I thought it was going to be. And I will say that, I think there are people that it's probably too much for right now under the current conditions. If this is the kind of movie that is just too upsetting for you to watch, I can understand that. But at the same time, I'm really glad that I watched this movie because of how upsetting it is. I'm not somebody who, typically I like movies that are entertaining and uplifting. It's hard for me to sit down and watch something that I know is going to be upsetting. But again, that comes back to, I think, making an effort to understand what other people have gone through and what other people are feeling. And again, I don't think that because I watched this movie that I know what it's like to have been through this type of experience. It's still not something that I've experienced. But I hope again that this was a pathway to a deeper understanding and just being more aware of these things and trying to consciously trying to understand what other people have gone through. I think that we should be upset by a movie like this, and as much as we don't want to feel that way, I really hope that this is a movie that people go and watch right now, because I think that it's so relevant to what is happening right now, and that maybe we need to feel upset. For me, it was an upsetting movie, but again, I'm glad that I watched it, because I come away feeling like I have a little bit more of an awareness, and hopefully I'm working towards an understanding of what many people have gone through and had to suffer, and just hopefully I'm deepening my empathy. That's important to me. And if deepening your empathy is important to you, not that this is the only way, and probably not even the best way to grow our empathy, but this is just my own personal process and journey, and I would invite you to check either one of these movies out, or both, if you are seeking to, a way to add to your own empathy. If you're not seeking to add to your own empathy, I would encourage you to ask why you wouldn't want to better understand human beings, why you wouldn't want to better understand the value of another human life. These are both really good movies. They're difficult movies, but I think they're important movies, especially right now. So, these are dark and difficult times, but I wish anyone watching the best, and I will see you on the other side.